Our main purpose today is to dispel certain misconceptions which appear to have arisen with respect to the case, and to explain a few developments which have taken place in England, which for one reason or another have really not hit the American public or the American press at all. The Immigration Service daily determines not to handle cases on humanitarian grounds and not to prosecute those cases for deportation. The fact that an alien may be deportable does not mean that the government has to start a proceeding against him. The statute makes ineligible for residence persons who have been convicted of offenses relating to the illicit possession of narcotic drugs or marijuana. And the words "or marijuana" were added to the statute specifically because the federal courts had held on a number of occasions that marijuana is not a narcotic drug. The decision itself was not a necessary one. The government would have us believe that the law poses such an absolute bar to the residence of someone with this type of conviction that it had no alternative, and that our only alternative is to turn to Congress to change the law.
We announced the birth of a conceptual country, Nutopia. Citizenship of the country can be obtained by declaration of your awareness of Nutopia. Nutopia has no land, no boundaries, no passports, only people. Nutopia has no laws other than cosmic. All people of Nutopia are ambassadors of the country. As two ambassadors of Nutopia, we ask for diplomatic immunity and recognition in the United Nations for our country and its people. Nutopian Embassy, 1 White Street, New York, New York.
I'd like to introduce Mr. John Hendricks of the committee action to the government's action taken last week. I believe has been very, very succinctly put by the Wall Street Journal in an editorial of March 28, 1973. It states, "We do not think it the mark of a civilized society that Miss Ono is forced to choose between abandoning the search for her husband, for her daughter rather, or living apart from her husband, whose presence in the United States is certainly no danger to anyone." And it continues, "Frankly, we find it more than a little hard to believe that authorities could find no legal way to resolve what is, after all, a highly unusual set of circumstances. Further, we submit, if the law does not reflect the human equities, it is a law that needs to be changed." It is really not our purpose here today to state our legal cause and to argue it before the press. That would be improper. Mainly, I should like to note that at 8:45 this morning, I filed with the Immigration and Naturalization Service a notice of appeal of the decision rendered by the immigration judge. That appeal goes to the Board of Immigration Appeals in Washington, another branch of the Department of Justice. And the course will follow the filing of briefs and oral argument in Washington. And I have 3 basic points to make. First, that this was not a necessary proceeding. Indeed, the immigration judge himself states that it is, and although we might have been left with a contrary, not a narcotics conviction that is involved in John Lennon's case. And thus I do not think it could be narcotics that this case was being prosecuted. The third point is as far as to cite an article which I had written about it. Thus we have a true, then commenced a proceeding against them to remove them because they had stayed beyond their authorized time. As a practitioner in this field, I would say that perhaps tension, and one that is perhaps impossible of denial, is one where parents are seeking additional time to find their child or to secure a court order giving them the custody of the child.
Very surprised that the judge made a statement. I'm going to quote his statement. There would appear to be some question as to whether the child in fact was to return to Mrs. Lennon. She appears to have called her mother in 1971 and complained that she was being harassed by detectives. As a result, the detectives were replaced by people who are personal friends of the Lennons, apparently to continue surveillance. It would appear that if the child is able to telephone the respondent and the detectives and their replacements are able to be close enough to the child so that she feels harassed, her whereabouts are not entirely unknown. At the time, Kyoko, my daughter, called me, and that was the last time that we had any conversation at all. The judge in Texas ordered Mr. Cox, the child's father, to permit her to call me, and that was the last time that I heard from her. And since then, they've left Texas, and though the judge was permitting me to have visitation rights, before the visitation was possible, they disappeared from Texas. And the father, Mr. Cox, is now in contempt of court in Texas. And so this statement that the judge made is really rather unreasonable, I would say. And I'm very surprised. We're really trying to look for her, but it is a very complicated situation, and I'm not free to really explain to anybody publicly how we're looking for her. But, well, now that I know that she's going to be 10 years old this year, and whenever I see a child, I think of her, but the children that reminds me of her around the age of 5 or 6, and I can't picture her being 10 years old, and it's a very strange feeling.
Well, I'd just like to clear up another point of that statement about the phone call, which was ordered by the judge in Texas. That's the only way. That was the first call in 2 or 3 years. And after that, there's a remark about detectives, which Yoko's child, had said over the phone with her father's voice in the background telling her what to say, because no 8, 9, or 10-year-old child starts talking about detectives. We took the detectives off, but also the Houston police were watching too. And it was about the next day or 2 days after, I don't know how long the thing went on, before there was any decision made, that Mr. Cox and Kyoko vanished in front of the eyes of the detectives and the police there. So that answers that statement. The other statements, there are many wild statements, I guess, but the other main statement was reference to the National Committee for John and Yoko, which are basically friends of ours, who are not a government-sponsored organization. They're a very small, tight group that are just looking after the information and incoming calls and concern about what's happening to us. And the remarks about whether we should go for a national referendum are a bit ludicrous, but the immigration authorities are quite capable of setting that up, and we'll go for anything. We feel as though this is just a beginning. And another thing to remember is that the court case in Texas gave us joint custody. So it's rather irrelevant to, apart from being sort of not very humane, to give Yoko permission to stay here if she finds her daughter, and me not, although we are given joint custody.
John, what is your whole reaction?
Called a declaration of Nutopia.
How does today's appeal from London that Alan Klein, your business manager of Apple and so on, has separated himself from you and the other people connected with it?
Well, I'd like to stick to the immigration, but the story is that we separated ourselves from him.
Was that so?
What do you think?
Why did you do it?
Well, we'll go into that the next game, you know.
Why
why do you think that the government has taken this position? Why do you think it's acted this way?
Well, I don't understand law, as it were, because it is finite, you know, and I don't really go, I can't express it and dig that scene, you know.